This is the last Sunday before we start to turn towards Advent and the New Year. Next Sunday is Christ the King Sunday, which is kind of the close of the year and really sort of part of Advent. And so this is the end of our journey through Luke that we've been on since the beginning of Advent last year. And Luke's gospel uses the temple as the bookend for Jesus' ministry. So Luke's is the gospel with what we call the infancy narratives, all the stories of Jesus' early childhood, and it's got a longer story of his birth. It's the one you'll hear at the Christmas pageant. And there are 6 small stories at the beginning of Luke's gospel. And of those stories, 3 of them take place in the temple. It is in the temple where the prophets recognize Jesus even when he's a small baby and his parents have brought him to do the religious dedication that's required. They recognize him as the Messiah, the one they've been waiting for, and they give us these beautiful songs about being grateful to have lived long enough to see that come true. And it is in the temple where Jesus, we don't know exactly how old he was, but when he was probably in adolescence, stays behind and astonishes all the teachers with his wisdom and understanding. And we get that story of Mary and Joseph worrying about him on their way back home. When they come back, they find him in the temple. And again, as part of this bookmark or the beginning of his ministry, he says, well, of course I'm here. Where else would I be but in my Father's house? And so perhaps it's no surprise, since it's been set up that way, that Luke also uses the temple as the backdrop for Jesus' great conflict between the religious leaders of his day and his own teaching. We had a little glimpse of that last week with the Sadducees come up to him, but there's a lot more in it that we won't get to read this year. Jesus comes into the temple and he sees the money changers and the sellers. He sees that parts of the temple have been turned into a marketplace. Some of this is necessary. The Jewish people of their day needed to buy animals for the sacrifices, and not all of them were raising doves at home. There had to be a place to do that. And you had to change the regular money that you would use in the marketplace into money that was considered good and clean to give to the temple. You couldn't just take the dollar bill you were going to buy your sandwich with and put it in the temple boxes. That was not acceptable. And so you had to go to these places and do this. But what Jesus sees is that these folks have taken this necessary religious requirement and used it as an opportunity to take advantage of a sort of closed market. There are no competitors. There's nowhere else to go. There's no one to keep them honest. And so they are not. And so Jesus comes into the temple, and that's the flipping of the tables, what we call the cleansing of the temple. He drives these dishonest merchants out. And the conflict is escalated. This is also in Luke's gospel where Jesus sees wealthy people giving a whole bunch to the temple and making a lot of noise about it and making sure people see that. And he draws his disciples' attention to a poor widow who gives just a little bit. But it is, as Jesus says, all that she has. These things happen in the temple too. And in today's gospel, Jesus is in the temple with his disciples. And he is seeing these things. He's seeing the injustice that's built into that marketplace. He's seeing the inequality in the way some seek honor and some are not noticed. And his disciples are seeing the stones and the decorations and what a grand and beautiful building it is. And that's fair. These are like fishermen and farmers, and maybe they've not ever seen a building this big before. There weren't very many of them. Certainly no other building that they would have ever spent time in was as beautifully adorned as the temple. But that's what they want to talk about. Look at these great stones. Look at this building. And Jesus says, even these stones will be toppled. Not even this grand space will stand. All of it will fall away. I imagine it's very unsettling to the disciples. But Luke records it for us in part because we believe the audience that Luke was writing to had already seen that happen. His audience had seen the temple fall. They knew that destruction. They'd lived through it. And they were living through much of what Jesus describes in that passage. Wars and rumors of wars, and false prophets rising up to say, "No, follow me," and that confusion and fear that he describes. So I don't know if this happens in other professions, but I promise you that among clergy, it's a very funny joke, maybe, to say, "They never taught me that in seminary." You're most likely to hear that when there's a problem with the roof. They didn't teach me how to do building maintenance in seminary, which is true, which is why I'm so grateful we have people like Rick Patrick and other folks who know how to do that here. And I don't need to know how to do that. But Jesus doesn't want his disciples to be able to say that. When they live through these times that are so scary and confusing, when there are wars and rumors of wars, when they are arrested and brought before the authorities, they will not be able to say, "But Jesus never taught me that." He has gotten them ready for this moment. And we see it play out. In the book of Acts, many of his followers are arrested and brought before governors and leaders of synagogues. And as Jesus instructs them to in this passage, they see that as an opportunity to give their witness. Some of the most beautiful testimonies to Jesus and his work come from the book of Acts, from folks who've been brought before the authorities and made to answer for their faith. Jesus tells them, don't try to come up with your whole story ahead of time. I will be there with you. You don't need to prepare your defense because I will give you what you need in those moments. I find it very comforting this week, even all the scary things that are in this passage. I found that very comforting. Jesus knew about unprecedented times. The headlines of his days and of the days that the disciples lived in the season after his death and resurrection were unprecedented. And if I never hear anything in the news described as unprecedented again, I will die a happy woman. But here we are, full of unprecedented things. But Jesus says, even if it's new, even if it doesn't match what you thought it would look like, even if it feels like things that would never fall are being toppled, I am with you. You have everything you need. And your role is the same. In scary times or in calm times, the church's job is to point to Jesus, to notice where his kingdom comes close, to see the ways in which he is bringing his kingdom closer to us, and to point it out to those who need that hope. Precedented or unprecedented, our job is the same. And we have indeed been taught and prepared and loved for this moment. And he is with us. Amen.